Paranormal experiences don't really work to a timescale, and therefore we invite you to listen to a Dark Minisode.
Hello everyone and welcome back to our second minisode of season 21. Two things to quickly announce. Firstly, thank you so much for all of the positive feedback regarding last week's minisode, where we of course told the story of my friend's sister Claire and her apparently possessed chair. Secondly, I'd like to make a bit of a public announcement. One of our wonderful listeners, Sophia, has pointed it out to me that, especially in the state side of things, some of the dynamic adverts that are inserted into the show have appeared to become slightly political, shall we say, borderline racist. Now, obviously, that's nothing I would ever condone. I literally do get to choose which categories adverts can play about. And from day one, politics, religion, anything that could stir up a hornet's nest has been a no. Sadly, some of these politician groups, they will mislabel or misrepresent their advertisement as entertainment, and sometimes with my hosting provider, they will slip through the net. In fairness to the hosting provider, when it's been done before, they've been really quick in sorting out the issue, and I hope they do so again. I've raised it with them this weekend, and hopefully, when they get through with this and get back in touch with me, we will have no more of this utter abhorrence on the show. So, sincerely, my apologies if anyone's been offended or affected by any of the sort of adverts that I specifically chose not to air on the show. And if you do come across one, believe me, it's an error, and I do not stand by whatever they say. And just like Sophia did, if you come across one of these adverts, please do let me know by emailing contact@thedarkparanormal.com so I can flag it. The last thing on earth I would want is to be misrepresented to you guys in terms of my belief systems or anything along those lines. There's a place for your political beliefs, and in truth, I genuinely don't care what they are as long as they don't affect any of our listeners, and the same goes for religion. You tune in to this show so you can hear something about the paranormal. You don't tune in to feel upset or disgusted, etc. So once more, my sincerest apologies. It is getting looked into, and I guarantee it will be resolved. But with that said, let's get to the matter in hand. And today's minisode is rather short in comparison to Claire's one last week. But it is still a very interesting story, sent in to us by our listener Kane, who writes, "Hi, I just want to really share my experience. Also, to preface, I am well and truly a non-believer in the supernatural. To me, there's no such thing as life after death or ghouls, monsters under the bed, nor heaven nor hell. It's a bit depressing of me, but we'll get to that later. However, don't get me wrong, the whole idea intrigues me, and I have seen and experienced some things I can't explain. My mother is completely the opposite from me. No, she doesn't believe in ghouls and goblins that live under the bed, but she does think that there is something after death. She says there must be, despite not having experienced anything herself. It's a coping mechanism to justify or at least rationalise why her dad is gone. Don't get me wrong, his passing came out of left field with a diagnosis of cancer that took just 2 weeks from diagnosis to taking him. Also, a bit of further background. I used to scream like Damien from The Omen, going into church every Sunday. Maybe a poor move when I attended a Church of England school. Anyways, returning to my story, cast your mind back to 2015. I just moved into a house in Dean Street in Bangor, North Wales, as a second-year university student. We'd pretty much all selected the rooms on first viewing, so I knew I had the best view in the house, looking straight at the university. It was perfect. However, upon entering the room for the second time, I had an extreme sense of unease. Now, I'm unsure whether to put it down as stress or actual excitement, but something definitely felt wrong. Anyway, I tried to shrug it off, until I kept going into that room. It was the second floor back bedroom. The sense that something was there. Again, I've been a non-believer in the whole paranormal jazz since I can remember. However, that's not to say I haven't seen shadows that shouldn't exist, things in the corner of my eye, or even scared myself into thinking that something that shouldn't exist is there in the corner of the room. I am human after all. Also, just to add some context, I moved into that house with 3 good friends and my partner at the time. I should have felt so safe in that house, and for the most part I did. There was just something extremely off about that second floor. It wasn't even a case of what I will call offness or awkwardness, if you like, that existed just when it was dark or when I was alone in the house. It was constant. The very first occasion of something terrifying happening was just a case of sleep paralysis. It was a good 6 months after we'd moved in. I was laying there in bed, and in the corner of my room was my housemate. We'll call him David because that's his name. I recall not being able to move, however, also trying to scream his name. The door was locked, and there wasn't a chance it was David in the corner of the room. I knew exactly what I was experiencing, however, I couldn't shift the feeling of terror. It was just out of this world, as I can remember rationalizing it to myself that the door was locked. There couldn't be anyone in that room with me. After a while, as with most cases of sleep paralysis, I managed to wake up, jump and turn the lights on, and as expected, no one was there. Nothing paranormal, nothing that no one shouldn't expect to happen throughout their lives. It's sleep paralysis. However, just a few weeks later is where it started to get interesting. The same housemate that I thought was in my room when I had my sleep paralysis episode, who I forgot to mention, seemed to be moving closer and closer throughout the experience, began screaming in the middle of the night. And I do mean screaming. It was blood-curdling. I've seen and heard some things in my life, but this was unreal. I genuinely thought he was being murdered. Put it this way, it woke the entire house up and a few neighbours as well. I was the first one to his door, banging on it like an IKEA madman. After what felt like 5 minutes, he eventually said, "Yeah, I'm fine." Not taking that as an excuse, I demanded that he open the door. Nothing there to see, just a night terror, by all accounts. The morning after, I sat him down and I asked what he saw. Sure enough, it was the same thing that was looking down at me the night I had my sleep paralysis episode. It was him, looking straight back at himself. The same malicious ideology, the same grinning face. We laughed about it eventually, but that's some scary nonsense. Even if it was a case of sleep paralysis, a folie à deux, or even priming of the event. Even today, I'm a little bit skeptical. Anyway, After a few uneventful months, again, after those events, both me and David got the same sense of unease back on that second floor, which I guess is quite understandable. Now it comes the time for Easter break, so everyone is going home for the holidays. I have to stay for a house inspection. Yes, I drew the very short straw, but I thought nothing of it. The evening was going fine. I was tidying up the kitchen. I had some music on. Then a knocking on the French windows at the back of the house. So I go to answer, and there's nobody there. The stupid thing is the porch light was on. I could already see that there was no one there, but still went to check anyway. Sure enough, an hour or so later, the knocking happened again. And again, I went to check, and again, nothing. Now don't get me wrong, I had moved from the kitchen window to sit down and watch some TV. But with the placement of the light and the living room, you could see if someone had walked down the back street, yet alone the actual garden and driveway. Yes, the house had a back drive and a garden. So I went outside, and after a few minutes of checking around the garden, ensuring no one was there, I returned to resume my film. A few seconds later, and I hear clattering from the upstairs bedroom, the one just above the lounge. With my hockey stick in hand, I went up to check, and again, nothing there. No sign of any misplaced ornaments, no moved furniture, nothing disturbed. Now we're getting to about 3 o'clock in the morning, and whilst slightly disturbed, I felt fine being in the home by myself. That was until a few seconds later, because there was a cacophony of smashing and footsteps from above. Rather than go and investigate this time, because I was extremely shaken up, I went to the neighbours to investigate to make sure it wasn't coming from next door instead. And I was affronted by an elderly gentleman in his nightgown, who, let's put it clearly, wasn't very happy to see me at stupid o'clock in the morning. Returning to the house to do another search, I checked one of my housemates' bedrooms, and there were ornaments broken around. At that point I was rather uneasy, so I called a friend of mine who I knew was working nights at the time, and he agreed to come and search the house fully with me. When he arrived, the noises and banging and footsteps continued. The first few times we laughed it off. Searching the house every so often, it became a bit of a game. That's until my friend went to the bathroom and saw David standing behind him in the mirror. As I say, at this point it was the Easter break, and David was approximately 250 miles away. On his return from the bathroom, I have never seen anyone so pale before. To note, my friend is also a skeptic, but what we've both seen does bring into question the solidity of human consciousness. What is real? What is believed? What actually happens? Bottom line of my experience is we were petrified. It wasn't the only time that me and Tom, the friend who witnessed David in the bathroom, had to stay behind for various things. But on the last occasion, we did have to leave the house. Kane. Well, thank you, Kane, so much for providing our second minisode for season 21. There is one nagging question I do have. Is the last occasion you're referring to what we've just had, or is that another experience? And if so, if you kindly share that with us, I'm sure we'd be more than happy to all hear that. Sometimes we receive quirky little emails like Kane's, and I really like them for one particular reason. It's the cadence, it's the flow, it's what's mentioned, it's how things are described. and I often use the term validator in Dark Bites for our Patreons, especially when dealing with shorter experiences. Because this, for me, contains a lot of what I say are validators. Things which you just wouldn't say if you were creating an event. Plus, Kane leans heavily and reminds us several times that he's a skeptic, a non-believer in the paranormal. But the elephant in the room within this experience is, of course, David. Similar to last week's Dark Paranormal episode, Katie's Room, where I, at the end, said we really need to know more about Katie's role in the whole haunting of that place. For me, this experience is crying out for words from David. Why was he appearing to you in your room? Why, even though you said it wasn't him, did you think it was him? And then why was he seeing himself in the same manner you did? Because even though we know that you are a non-believer in the paranormal, even me, as a believer in the paranormal, if I saw myself at the end of my bed in a hypnagogic state, I would recognize that can't possibly be me, and I don't think that I would scream. I think I would rationalize it even being a believer. It would be much more likely that you should have screamed when you thought you saw David. But why did David scream so powerfully that it woke neighbours, you thought he was being murdered, when he saw himself? That to me says there's something much deeper that we don't know that's going on with David. Does he dabble in the occult? Was he the sort of person that was interested in the occult? Or did he seem depressed or anything around that time? Things which may lead to paranormal encounters. Either way, Kane, thank you for giving us this week's minisode. And I can't wait to speak to you all again next week. Until then, stay safe and take care.